Welcome to the We Are Human Leaders podcast. I'm Alexis Zana, co-director at Human Leaders. Together with Sally Clark, today we're speaking to Megumi Miki. Today's conversation sheds a new light on what we believe to be underrated and often unsuspecting leadership superpowers. Megumi is an author, speaker, and consultant in leadership, culture and diversity and inclusion, with a background in strategy, economics, and finance. Megumi challenges the status quo in leadership to unlock the hidden talent and collective potential. She's the author of Start Inspiring, Stop Driving, Unlock Your Team's Potential to Outperform and Grow, and Quietly Powerful, How Your Quiet Nature is Your Hidden Leadership Strength, which has received the Australian Career Book Award of 2020 and the Best Leadership Book of 2020. This episode is a real invitation to tap into the power of your unique and authentic leadership strength at work and beyond. Welcome. We hope you enjoy it as much as we did. Thank you for joining us today, Megumi. We're very excited to be speaking with you. Sally and I have both been diving into your work recently. And we'd like to know, can you start by sharing with us a little bit about your story and what brought you to write your book, Quietly Powerful, and how that's kind of got you to the work that you're doing now?
Sure. So there's a personal and a professional story to that. So the personal story is that I have always been a quieter person. As a little kid, I was very quiet. The baby of the family. I've got an older sister and my mum and dad, and my dad's quieter, but my mum and my sister aren't that quiet. And so often I used to be quite comfortable being the quieter kid. And I remember my mum used to often talk on my behalf. So somebody might ask a question and she'd just answer it. And so I felt quite okay with that because it was easy, right? You just sit back and let them talk and I'd let them go like that. And so, so I grew up like that. And in Japan, so it's part of my upbringing has been in Japan, and my background, my parents are Japanese. I'm Australian born, but anyway, I've got a Japanese background. And there's a word in Japanese that says, the word is called otonashi, which is often what I got told. And it means mild and meek and quiet and reserved and all of those sort of things. But it actually means, when you translate it literally, it means adult-like. So it means mature in some way. So in a way, I got told that, and I never thought of it as being that bad. So I never really thought of it as being necessarily a bad thing. I grew up that way through school and all of that. And the other thing is, when I was growing up at school, I moved around a lot as a kid through school. I went to 8 different schools, and I think between Australia, Japan, and Canada, 3 different cities in Australia as well. So lots of different schools. And my way of coping with that was to just stay invisible and just blend in and as much as I can. Because what I found is that, if you're in Australia, I look a bit different. Back in the 70s and 80s, stood out a bit. There weren't many Asian kids around. So I just did my very best to blend in as much as possible, which meant I was a bit quieter. The other thing is, when I went back to Japan, interestingly, I may have looked the same, but some of the things that I did that I learned in Australia was a real no-no in Japan, like just sitting down cross-legged. That's a big no-no for girls in Japan. So things like that I got told, and some people picked on me, and so I thought, okay, I'm just going to blend in and try and do what everybody else is doing. So that all of that combined, and as you probably know, Japanese culture is very much a conformist culture. You're supposed to look the same, and at school you have to wear the same uniform and same haircut and all of these things. So all of that combined meant that I was very skilled at adapting to fit in. And so that also meant that I stayed quiet. So that was my personal story. And so when I went into the workplace and people told me to speak up more and all of these things, it was like, hang on, that's a bit different to my upbringing and my experience. So that's my personal side.
Incredible. And it sounds like it's this blend of, I guess, what you would refer to as conditioning, growing up as the youngest child, as you said, having an outspoken parent or a parent that was speaking sort of on your behalf, as well as that cultural dimension of the more collectivist orientated sort of culture really imbuing into you from a young age then?
Having said that, though, because I did grow up in Australia as well, yeah, so in a way I had a slightly different take on it as well compared to some of my friends who lived in Japan for their whole lives. So there was a little spark that said there's something different that's possible here. So that's the personal side, but the professional side is I've been working in the leadership and organisational development field for a good 20 odd years, and being in that field, looking at different cultures and looking at different leaders, I noticed the skew or bias towards the louder, the dominating, the people who took charge in quotation marks, and that almost like, the leaders know better kind of belief, and the damage that sometimes that can do. While I was also noticing a few of the leaders that I worked for who were a little quieter, and they were a bit more empowering and allowing and much more supportive of supporting our voice as the team members. I really enjoyed working for them, and I thought, well, there's something a bit not quite right here in this whole idea of leadership. And while a lot of these things have been written, like, Good to Great talks about humble leadership and things like that, I just felt there's still a little underlying unconscious belief, if you like, about what good leadership looks like. And I really wanted to shake that up in some way.
Agreed.
Yeah, and was there, you sort of spoke about some of the leaders that you worked with, you saw their different approach, their perhaps more quiet approach. Were there particular moments or people in particular that stood out to you as being inspiring, or creating again that spark moment of things can be different?
There's a couple of leaders that come to mind. I worked at Anderson Consulting, which doesn't exist anymore. It's now called Accenture, which is a huge global consulting firm, but it used to be called Anderson Consulting. There are a couple of leaders that I worked there on projects. One was a woman who was the team leader of a project team, and she just left me to run things. And she was there. She always said, if you need help, just call out. But she just left me to run things, and she'd listen to me if I was having trouble and ask a few questions, and then we'd sort of solve the problem and move forward. And I found that was very empowering. And even though as a young consultant, sometimes I really didn't know what I was doing, I felt like I was given the trust. And so I felt like I worked really hard as a result, because I'd wanted to live up to her expectations. So that was very powerful. And the manager above that, who was a man, he was similar. And so these two had a huge impact on me, just observing how they led the team and how the team performed so well in the end. So each of the teams ended up working with the clients remarkably well. So it was a combined client consultant team. And in a way, we kind of took on a similar approach with the clients, where we empowered the clients to do a lot of the thinking and work with us, rather than often in consulting, what I see is consultants know better and they go in and tell people what to do, and it's really quite offensive because clients know their businesses. So I really enjoyed that approach. And so I found that way of consulting and as well as leading was really powerful. And so that was quite a long time ago, but I reflect on that quite a bit and say, well, that was a really good time in terms of watching different ways of leading. And that male leader that I talked about, the person who was managing the whole client engagement, he's one of my quietly powerful leader interviewees for the book. And so I went back to him and said, can I interview you? Yeah, and he's been great.
Wow. Sort of stepping into that a little bit deeper, Megumi, can you talk us through what the anatomy of a quietly powerful leader is? What does it look like?
I was reading that question. I'm wondering what you meant by anatomy. Like, what is there a particular thing you're looking for?
I guess the structure that you would say, or the approach that a quietly powerful leader might have. What are the sort of the hallmarks, perhaps, of their approach that would help you recognise someone as a quietly powerful leader?
So I think some of the hallmarks would be that they're not always in the centre of attention. They're not always the one that's talking all the time, which is the quiet aspect of it. But alongside that because of because they don't take up the space, if you like, they allow space for others to step in and step up. And what that does is it builds trust because they listen, but also they create space for people to speak, and therefore they've got more to listen to. So that will be sort of at the behavioural level. But to me, what is different is that they listen, but they listen from a place of humility and curiosity, as opposed to, how sometimes people listen in order to rebut or argue back or respond. So you don't feel that with these leaders. And I found that with the people I interviewed for the book. I found it really easy to speak with them. And, I was the interviewer, but I still also felt listened to in a way, which is a strange thing to say as an interviewer, but it just felt like that. And so it's creating that space, having that humility. They're curious because they know that they don't know everything. And so, they create that space. So, it's like an understated kind of presence, but they are very present at the same time. So they don't take up the space, but you know that they're there.
And it's interesting, Megumi, because when I first came across your work and came across your book, Quietly Powerful, it struck me that we might be talking about giving strength to introverted leaders and how introverted leaders might find a way to raise their voice. But what I'm hearing here is that it's more of these sort of practice trait-like ways of being, and mindsets, almost like approaching things with curiosity and humility, which aren't necessarily innate traits. There are things that we can learn to be. So,
absolutely.
And I guess it goes really lovely into our next question then is, what exactly do organizations stand to lose when quietly powerful leaders aren't able to step into their power in our workplaces?
So I think when quietly powerful leaders or potential quietly powerful leaders are overlooked, you miss out on this amazing leadership that is very inclusive, because that's the result that you get when you have leaders who create space for others. So you miss out on inclusion, which is so important these days. You miss out on leaders who empower their teams, like I was sharing about the two leaders that I was talking about. And as a result, the performance suffers, because if I think about, thinking about some of the projects I've done in consulting or even post-consulting days, comparing my time with these two leaders I spoke about versus another leader who was quite dominating and telling me what to do and things like that, I reckon the effort I put in was remarkably different, firstly. But I think the result that we got together was hugely different in terms of the outcome we achieved with the clients and the team and things like that. I still remember that particular client project. The clients were so happy. We did this whole celebration, and it was just a really fantastic project that we were in. So I think, the organisations really miss out on that inclusion, engagement, empowerment, and things like that. And also, I guess, if you're not listening to some of the quieter voices, you're missing out on the different perspectives. And I think often that's talked about, because quieter people often will be thinking about things, listening to things and observing things that people who are talking all the time might miss. So there's something different to bring in there.
It also sounds like there's potential sort of real collaboration that can be missed when we're not sort of tapping into that mindset, because of that beautiful way that quietly powerful leaders can hold space and create that sense of inclusivity. And it sounds like your experience was a really beautiful example of that, where it became something where people felt very involved, very valued, and that creates such a beautiful sort of almost less hierarchical, collaborative approach than one might have traditionally seen in a consultancy environment. Was that your experience? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. No, I still keep in touch with a number of the people on that team.
Wonderful. I'm curious, and this is a bit of a personal note. As a former finance lawyer, I remember really clearly as a lawyer being told a few times to fake it until I make it in the work environment. So to really sort of for me, it felt like sort of stepping into behaviours that didn't feel very natural to me, but felt necessary to be successful in that quite cutthroat environment. We hear it a lot, and it's often something that I think is sort of told to younger people as well. You know, you don't have your confidence yet, so just fake it till you make it and overcome your fear and potentially imposter syndrome in that way. What are your thoughts on that concept?
Well, now that I've lived a few more years than when I first got told some of that, I would say absolutely not helpful. And the experience I had earlier on in my career, particularly as I was starting in leadership and culture, because my original background wasn't that. I was in economics, finance, and strategy, so very different areas. And I jumped into culture and leadership. I had to learn facilitation skills, public speaking skills, all of these things. So they were new to me. And what I found when I was doing all this training, and I had just incredible training from teachers who were very different to the usual. It wasn't just technique, it was absolutely about who you are and who you showed up as. So it was really quite challenging and stretching. But I remember one time we were training as a group, and there were other people in the team who were much more gregarious and entertaining and extroverted. And so I was thinking, oh, I need to bring that energy, you know. And so I stood up and I tried to be much more energetic, use my hands and all of these things. And the teacher told me, "You're like a happy hammer. You're just making that up. You're faking it." And I'm going, "No, what am I supposed to do?" And she said, "That's not going to work for you, because you could really tell, you can feel that you're putting it on." So since then, I've just been thinking, well, what am I supposed to do? And I couldn't quite work it out, because I did need to bring energy, but I had to, over time, work out how I bring my energy, which was actually more about presence. So it wasn't about the external, you know, gregariousness. It was actually about my presence and however I showed up with that presence. So that was a really great learning. But also what I say to people around faking till you make it is about distinguishing faking versus growing. So there will be times where you need to grow in order to develop some skills. And it's going to be uncomfortable, of course. And there's nothing wrong with that, to go through that discomfort because you're growing, as long as you're developing skills or experiences that are uncomfortable, going through the experiences that are uncomfortable for a purpose. So as long as it's meaningful and purposeful to you, then that's okay, because you'll pursue that. So I went through a lot of uncomfortable training, but I knew I really wanted to be a good facilitator, so that's okay. On the other hand, faking it is when people tell you this is what you should do, and you're not quite sure, and you don't really have a compelling reason, and you have to put it on. So to me, there's a difference there.
And it sounds like a very important distinction to make there, Megumi, and it's an interesting one, because I think we often think of this word charisma as being associated with leadership. And I think when we dive into the language of these words a little bit more, we actually find it's quite powerful to understand what makes up things like charisma, because there's been research done by a woman named Vanessa Van Edwards around what actually makes charisma. And she talks about charisma as having two core components, and that is competence and reliability. So when you talk about this idea of faking it till you make it, and you know, being someone who's naturally perhaps quieter or naturally not extroverted and waving your hands around when you speak and things like that, I think people can detect that inauthenticity in that moment, because it isn't naturally you. And so I think sometimes I know when I first came across that research, this idea of understanding charisma is the coupling of competence and reliability. I thought, wow, so actually everyone has the capacity to be charismatic. It's just bringing those things together in the right formula that actually feels natural to you. And everything you've said really, for me, really reinforces that idea.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's really interesting.
And I think also for me, what stands out is that sense of sort of being able to tune into the type of growth, the type of discomfort that we're experiencing. Like you said, what's the meaning behind this? Why am I doing this? And I fully agree. I think, growth by definition is uncomfortable. But being able to identify whether we're growing in a way that does have that sort of authenticity and therefore the discomfort is okay, or whether it's coming from, another motivator, an external motivator that maybe someone's telling us we should be different. And I certainly relate to what you said as well. When I was younger, I was very susceptible to that, and it's been a really, it's been a great process to see that as I know myself better, I'm better able to identify when the growth feels authentic or not.
Yeah, which is why it's really challenging for quieter professionals when they get told things like, oh, you need to go and do assertiveness training or presentation training, and there's a formula, it doesn't work for them. And a number of people who've come to my programs or coaching who said, oh, I've been to some of those and it was really difficult, is because of that, because it wasn't something that they saw meaning and purpose for. So it wasn't coming from their desire, as opposed to somebody else telling them they need to do it.
And just moving through that as well, Megumi, because you're obviously a quietly powerful leader yourself. So how do you find that authenticity and that alignment, in how you lead others, that feels right and natural for you?
It's interesting. As I was interviewing the quietly powerful leaders, I started to notice a few patterns of what I noticed in these leaders, and I named them the 3 attributes of the quietly powerful leaders. And I think that's what keeps me authentic. And so the 3 are, firstly, that you just need just getting comfortable in your own skin. So not feeling like you're good or bad. You're just a person, and you have strengths and weaknesses, and you have things that you like and don't like, and have the whole lot. So you're whole, rather than thinking you've got strengths and you should just focus on that. Which I know there's some quarters where you talk about strengths-based training or coaching and things like that. I think that's partially useful, but it's partial. Because when you start to go, okay, well, weaknesses are no good, you should ignore them. Well, it's still there. So what do you do with it? And, you feel bad about it. So that's not helpful. So I guess to get to that place of being okay with, you've got strengths and weaknesses. And of course, you can work on some of the weaknesses if it's useful to do so. And so just getting comfortable with that. So that's the first attribute. The second attribute, which I've already touched on, is about presence. And I do find that the more comfortable you become with yourself, the more present you can be with people, because you're not as self-conscious and worrying about how am I coming across, or how, what's the right thing to say, or am I coming across as competent, and, those little worries in the head. As you get more comfortable, you're not as worried, and therefore you can be much more present to each moment and what's going on, and being able to be of service, which goes into the third attribute, which is about being purposeful. And again, we've already talked a bit about this purposefulness, whether it's about growth or whether it's about in any interaction or the work you do. If you have that sense of purpose that's bigger than yourself, then I do think that you feel like you're doing something that's pulling you, rather than you've been pushed into doing something. And that makes a huge difference in terms of being authentic, even when you're feeling uncomfortable. And I've found that the quietly powerful leaders, and quite a number of them said, oh, I never thought of myself as a leader, and I didn't really get into it until somebody tapped me on the shoulder. And they said the only reason why they stepped into leadership is not because they wanted power or control or attention. It was because they felt they could contribute to something bigger. And so that's a very strong pull, as opposed to, it's more the ego wanting the attention or control or whatever. And I think that's such a powerful way to lead, that we need more in the world. And so for me personally, I want to see more of those leaders to shine. So that's my purpose, wanting to encourage people who may be a little quiet or maybe felt disempowered in the past, when they can find that purpose to really step in with that. So there's I don't know whether you've come across this idea called free trait theory. So it's Professor Brian Little who talks about free trait theory, where if you do feel that passion or sense of purpose, you can really, it's quite possible for people to behave out of character. So if you're a lecturer, for example, and you're quite, shy and quiet, if you're passionate about a topic, you can completely be very animated and so on. So, so I find that too, where, I don't particularly like being the centre of attention, but I will for a purpose.
And imagine if we had leaders who were in positions because of that passion and because of that purpose, rather than the need to seek title or the need to dominate or the need to have power.
Absolutely.
It's just, imagine how different the world would look if that was the reason everyone went into leadership.
Yeah, exactly. That's certainly an aspiration, and if I can play a small part, then I'll be very happy.
I hear that.
Definitely, that definitely aligns with human leaders.
I'm
as
sure.
Well.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So, Megumi, for those of us who are perhaps not so quieter types, and we want to really tap into that beautifully inclusive approach that you spoke to earlier, how can we, what are the key ways that we can use or tools that we can use to start to cultivate the skills that a quietly powerful leader has?
Yeah, I think it's a nice way to ask that question, because something that often people who are not so quiet would say is, how do we support these quieter people? And I say to them, don't try and support them, learn from them.
Yes.
Because there are things that they do that's actually much more beneficial as a leader than perhaps some of the people who are, it's not to say everything is, but there are some things that the quieter professional does that is useful. So that will be one, to really notice what they do in terms of how they listen, what they listen to, how they think about things, how they synthesize different ideas. Notice that more, notice that talent. So you can learn from them, but also notice that talent and really highlight that, rather than saying, oh, they're quiet, they're not leadership material, which is what often happens. So that will be one. That way you can really start to not only recognize those people and their talents, but also it gives them more confidence to say, okay, I'm okay with this style and I can bring my best version, rather than feeling like they're not good enough because they're quieter. And if you see that they've got really great potential in their own style, then of course promote them. Look past the initial style or initial impression you might have. Maybe they come across as may not outwardly confident, but they've got a lot of substance. So why not tap into that? So that would be one. The other thing is, it's related, but the other thing is to not make assumptions. So something I've noticed people do sometimes is, when somebody's quiet, they make assumptions like, oh, they won't be very good at public speaking, for example. I personally fell into that bias where I was working with somebody who's quite quiet as a colleague, and we were about to do a huge 100-person event, and we were going to co-facilitate. And it's really silly, but because I've done facilitation, even though I'm quiet, I was feeling quite comfortable with that. But I was a bit worried about this guy because he was quite nervous and, quite quiet and things like that. And he got on stage and he was amazing. I was blown away, and I'm going, oh my God, I'm making assumptions that I'm telling other people not to make. And I know I get upset when people make that assumption about me, and I did it myself. So it's like, catch those assumptions and go, hang on, that's not always true. So that's an example, public speaking, but there's many, many other assumptions that people might make, whether it be, people who are quieter in the meetings and they assume that they don't have anything to say, or they're not really, capable, or, lots of different things can be assumptions. But actually, if you gave them the time, the space, or even chat to them afterwards, you find that they've got so much depth, and you miss out on that.
And What's so interesting, Megumi, when I was hearing you speak then, as you said, even yourself has fallen into the trap of this. And I think what we often, need to realize is that we are very geared to make judgments. It's actually what our brain's best at doing. We are very geared to get quite stuck in our mental sets of what we think something means. And if someone's quiet, it means they'll be, bad at this and better at this, or they're probably more cerebral and less social and all of these sorts of stories that we make up. But what I really loved hearing you say was that it's not about necessarily whether or not your brain will make that judgment. It's about taking the opportunity to challenge that judgment and say, actually, is that the right story, or am I missing something here? And opening the space to challenge that.
Yes, absolutely, and really look for evidence. Disconfirming evidence. And
Absolutely.
I'm glad, because so the good thing about my assumption making about this colleague that I was working with is I thought it, but I didn't really say anything or stop him from doing anything. I'm so glad, because he was absolutely amazing.
And how often must we as leaders think, oh, well, this person's not really demonstrating what we believe to be capacity to be in that sense, so we'll take them off that project and we won't give them the speaking opportunity, or we'll reassign them to this particular role that's maybe less client facing, or whatever the opportunity might be. And how many beautiful opportunities must we be missing in that instance?
Yeah, that's right. And when you talk about client facing opportunities, some of the quietly powerful leaders I interviewed were partners at law firms. And one of them, I remember saying, she noticed that the clients really liked talking to her, being the quieter one, than a louder partner, because she listened. So she was actually better at the client relationships. And the less quiet partner actually acknowledged that in front of a whole group, saying, I've noticed that clients like to talk to her.
Wow.
It was really powerful when I heard that.
I'd also imagine that the team that she was working with would probably, feel a lot safer in a lot of ways working with someone who is a better listener and who creates that space for different different kinds of approaches, as opposed to the sort of domineering, the classic sort of law firm partner that might be the norm in most places.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'll raise my hand there, because I know that I am certainly naturally falling into the not so quiet leadership type. And, it's not always intentional, but it's the impact you have. And I think that's the moment where you have to realize that even though your intention might be good, often if the impact isn't what you want, that's an opportunity to learn from some of those quietly powerful leaders and what they're doing, and shift your behavior to find yourself there as well.
Yes, absolutely. And I know not so quiet leaders who have learned and accommodated and done all of these things. So it's not like you can't. So that's why I don't think this is about introversion, extroversion. It's about a skill or a mindset that can actually bring something different in the whole idea of leadership. What I was going to say before is I just posted an article about no more bulldozers, no more. So I'm sure you, having been through the election campaign, this whole idea of the bulldozer came up.
Yeah.
And I do think, or I do hope, that the new government creates a different kind of tone, because it's necessary now that they've got quite diverse voices in the parliament to really listen and work with that diversity. And otherwise you miss the opportunity of bringing in these voices. Imagine, I was really worried if there was still this bulldozer approach and brought all these amazing views in, it's just going to get nowhere. So
absolutely.
So that would be another example, I think, for the benefit of that creating space and also the safety.
Enormous opportunities, I think, at the moment in that context, for sure.
Yeah. And now, Megumi, we would love to know, and I guess, this will be our last question, bringing our podcast sort of to an end here for the listener. And, what's the leadership advice that you would give yourself way back at the outset of your career, knowing what you know now, and why?
Yeah, I thought about that question, and if I look back at my career, I wouldn't do it differently. So I have no regrets. So in light of that, there were some challenges and there were some jobs that I really didn't like and everything else, but that led me to something else. So in a way, I guess the first thing is not to get too hung up on where you go and where you end up, because sometimes I hear younger people going, well, what's the right job and what's the right career, and stressing out about that. And so less worry, and also be open to just experiencing different things, and that will help you to work out where you want to put your energy. If you just narrow too early, unless you already know and you know where to go, that's, some people are like that, and that's okay. But if you're not sure, just try and experience a range of things. So then eventually you go, oh, I don't like that, or I really like that. And that way you can really hone in on the things that you like to do, and you feel that sense of purpose. So I was very lucky that I got to experiment for a little while, and I stumbled across leadership and culture, and I thought, wow, this is it. This is where I want to be, and that I could put in my energy from there. So that's probably one main thing I would say for younger people.
Yeah, and I think it's so valuable, Megumi, because as you've mentioned, something that can bring quietly powerful leaders really to the fore is that idea of having or working in what they feel passionate about and what they feel purpose in. And so I think, as you've said, trying things until you find what lights you up is really, really important. And I know, looking back at my career, I entered university at 17. I had no idea where I was going to end up. And so my advice would be really similar. Just try stuff, try anything.
Yeah. And try stuff not only in your work, but outside of work as well. Because I remember one of the earlier things that ended up, which helped me to go into the work that I do now, was I went to this was part of like a culture change program. It was quite a personal development oriented program. And I remember at the end of it sitting there going, I have no idea what I'm passionate about, because I've completely lost touch with myself. And so the only way to get out of that was to really think, well, what do I enjoy doing? And it was like painting and drawing, nothing to do with career. But I started playing around, and eventually I started to get better at noticing what lights me up, what doesn't.
Incredible.
So it's almost like a step behind before even thinking about career-wise, what is really enjoyable, what lights me up. So, yeah,
I think
there's
that's
a few
such an
things
important.
there.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point as well, and it's one that's not always addressed in our education systems. I certainly came away from school and university knowing ostensibly a lot about, things, but not really knowing myself very well, and not being aware of those sort of the variety of different skills and passions that I had. So I think those are really valuable questions for people to take away and reflect on, that it's not just what are you passionate about in a work environment, but what are you passionate about?
And translating that into work, not necessarily like if I enjoy painting that I have to be a painter, but there's different aspects to that about creativity, making something up from nothing is something that I enjoy. So that's what I do right now.
Yeah, and tuning in also, I can imagine there's also a level of sort of tuning into the present again that is in painting, and being very present to what you're creating, and very in the moment. And I think that, as you spoke to earlier, is such a wonderful capacity for leaders to be developing, that sense of presence and attunement. Thank you so much for your time, Megumi. Sure. It's been such a beautiful conversation.
Thank you.
I've really gotten so much out of it, and I have so many people I want to share this conversation with already, so thank you so much. I'm really grateful for your time.
Oh, thank you so much to both of you. That was really enjoyable.
We hope you enjoyed what was for us a powerful and delightful conversation with Megumi Miki. You can find all of her details and the links to her book and more in our show notes. And feel welcome to join us at www.wearehumanleaders.com. Thank you so much for being on this journey with us. We look forward to connecting with you in the next episode. See you soon.